It's true, President Barack Obama has deported almost 2 million immigrants. However, in the absence of any action from Congress, there's new evidence that suggests that immigrants facing deportation are getting their cases dismissed more frequently. And it might have something to do with the fact that there are over 300,000 immigration cases pending in the U.S. justice system. Joining us now is the author of Approaching the Bench from Inside the Immigration Court, retired Judge William Zimmer. Judge Zimmer, thanks so much for talking to us.
And thank you for having me.
You know, in this show, we cover immigration from all kinds of perspectives, but it's very different from your point of view. So I suppose that in your hands, I'm sorry to say it that way, but maybe you destroyed many families, and at the same time, you kept many families together. How do you decide these incredibly difficult decisions?
Well, the law provides a standard. I should point out that in immigration proceedings are very emotional in general. There are either tears of joy or tears of sorrow.
Exactly.
And in fact, immigration judges, there's a study, it was done in San Francisco and is published in the Georgetown Law Journal, that immigration judges experience trauma on a level of emergency personnel in the emergency rooms.
And I can imagine that. For instance, I don't know if you kept counting, but how many people you deported, Judge? Do you remember?
Well,
you were working for 17 years in the court, so...
Well, I never really kept count. I might point out that there have been people who I have deported and have actually, after the hearing, come up and thank me. And I reflected on that, and I realized that this is their first experience where they had a judge of some kind actually listen to their story and hear them, even though the decision was not favorable.
That is true. When you decided to retire, how many cases you left pending? Because I've heard that's one of the biggest problems that the court system has. It has 300,000 cases pending, and I mean, we're talking about millions of lives here. So right. How many cases do you leave pending?
When I left in February 2012, my docket held over 2,000 cases. I talked to a judge today who's still on the bench, actually, before I came here, and I was informed that the caseload is now, at least downtown Houston, about 3,600 cases.
But that's amazing, Judge. I mean, can you imagine all the lives that depend on those decisions? And those are papers just waiting to be read, and then cases to be decided on. So what's your recommendation? You're not working anymore. You're retired. What's your recommendation? What would you do? What needs to be done?
For one thing, I think that the immigration courts need to be made more independent, separated from the executive branch. This was a recommendation by the American Bar Association in the late 1990s. It was actually proposed in Congress but never made it through. I think this is inevitable. In 1969, the Congress made the tax court, which was formerly just like the immigration court in IRS, a constitutional court. This would separate if it was done for the immigration court, it would separate the immigration courts from the enforcement arm of the government, and I think it would favor fundamental fairness for the people who are brought before it.
Judge Zimmer, let's suppose that you're facing with an undocumented immigrant who has children here in the United States, who were born here in the United States. Is he or she less likely to be deported because his kids are here? As you know, many people call them anchor babies. So what happens when you see a case like that?
Well, it depends on the circumstances of that particular individual. The law for people who are in the United States without permission requires a person to qualify for relief to have been in the United States, physically present continuously for at least 10 years. It requires good moral character during that period under review. And it also requires now exceptional and extremely unusual hardship on a spouse, parent, or child who is a lawful permanent resident or a United States citizen.
And you were to decide that, right? I mean, what's unusual?
And those are the kind of cases I personally, there were plenty of them, but in a way I dreaded those cases because there was always hardship. Whether the case was granted or denied, there was always significant hardship. There were case law that that explains the standard, and of course immigration judges, as creatures of law and regulation, are required to follow precedent cases.
And finally, something that we never hear is your position and other judges' position on immigration. I was surprised to hear that you are for immigration reform, that you like a path to citizenship, that you would like to legalize people who you deported, basically.
I hear politicians say the system is broken. If it is broken, Congress broke it in 1996 with regard to the people who are who would qualify for the proposed DREAM Act. In 1952, you may be familiar with the 52 Act in your experience, but that was the sort of the consolidation of all the immigration laws that came before. Everything was repealed and it was organized in the 1952 Act. In 1952, suspension of deportation was provided, and the immigration courts, or special inquiry officers at that time, were allowed to consider hardship to the applicants themselves. The hardship level was a little bit less. It was extreme hardship as opposed to exceptional and extremely unusual hardship.
Just one final question. Do you see more minors crossing the border by themselves, and what would you do with them? I mean, do you return them back to their country of origin?
As far as seeing them cross the border, I'm not sure. In Texas, I believe it's cheaper to detain people in Texas, and so the government sends a lot of detainees, both children and adults, to Texas, and so the detention facilities and sometimes county jails are used. And of course, in Texas for children, they have Catholic Charities and a number of other organizations that hold these kids and bring them to court.
Judge Zimmer, thanks so much for talking to us. It's really a very different perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.